Greetings, chess players. My name is Chris Torres. This is Daily Chess Musings, and we are doing the free online summer chess camp. Um, and today we have our special guest, Grandmaster Vinay Bhat, and you probably have heard me talking about his book, How I Became a Chess Grandmaster. Um, it just won Book of the Year. For me, it was Book of the Year, but it's now officially the best book of the year, awarded by the Chess Journalists of America. And Vinay, congratulations! That's
Thank you.
quite the
Thanks for having me
Yeah,
on too.
that's
Eh,
quite the accomplishment, and is kind of cool because Daily Chess Musings actually won best website. Um, that's not working. There we go. Best website. So we're connecting the best book with the best website right now. Um,
Perfect.
so
Congrats to you as
thank
well.
you. Last time we talked, I think you were going to be like flying out to the Marshall Chess Club. Did you do that?
That's actually still coming
Oh,
up. So end of this month, I'll be in Toronto
wow.
at the Hart House Chess Club in Toronto, and then the Marshall Chess Club in early September, just after Labor
That's
Day.
exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm
The
looking forward
big
to it.
book tour. And then, of course, last time we talked, you had gotten a call from Viswanathan Anand on, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
congratulations.
that's right. Actually, I think when you came by where I live in
Mm-hmm.
Oakland, and yeah, Anand had reached out and said congrats on the book, and he was I mean, that really sort of made my day, made my week, in a couple ways. Like he was my chess hero growing up. In fact, then he took the time to he noticed that the book came out. He saw a little bit of the interview, I think, with Sagar Shah in Chess Base India. And yeah, took the time then to reach out. So much appreciated. It's been there was I was happy with the book, but I'm really thrilled with sort of the reception that I've heard from others.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and it's well deserved. I mean, sometimes when it's your own work, you think it's pretty good, but it's really when you start hearing from other people. And for me, the book was tremendously useful. I was just, in fact, I was one of my daughters had played a game at a local chess club and was a little worried about playing against the Sicilian. So I just well, I
Okay.
told her, you can approach it with knight f3 and then bishop b5 check, and then it's like you're already ready to get castled if need be. And then I showed her your notes. Said, see,
Yeah.
Vinay did this,
No, no,
and
actually,
yeah, he's a grandmaster now.
no, that actually, even that Bishop B5 Sicilian, what's funny is that, so I don't play as much tournament chess these days, but every so often I'll play a blitz
Mm-hmm.
tournament. And earlier this year at the Berkeley Chess School, there was a charity blitz event, but it got a very strong crowd. Sam Shanklin was
Wow.
there, Christopher Yu was
Wow.
there, Steven Zirk was there. I think there was at least a dozen IMs and GMs probably
Mm-hmm.
there. And I remember for that, I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I play at this tournament? There's like so many strong players. I settled on the Bishop B5 Sicilian again, and actually I cleaned up with it. So
Wow. Yeah.
it's still a good
Yeah.
opening.
Yeah. And of course there's some fine complexities for a player like you, but it's relatively simple for somebody that doesn't
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
no, you're right. You bring your
Yeah.
pieces out, then you fight for
Yeah.
the center. It's yeah, it you avoid some of the usual. crazy attacks that sometimes come up in the Sicilian, or worrying about your opponent's attack against your own king. Yeah, I think there's a reason actually Anand played the Bishop B5 Sicilian for a while in his World Championship
Yeah, he
matches.
did. And then,
Fabiano Caruana did as well against
uh-huh.
Magnus. So I think it's a popular choice even amongst the very top
Yeah,
players.
when Anand was using it, then I'm like, uh-oh, now my stuff's gonna be well known. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
your secret choices. It used to fly under the radar. I feel like that it was played more by like people not at the very
Mm-hmm.
top. Occasionally, it was used by a top grandmaster as like a blitz weapon or a rapid chess weapon. But now it's become very common, even in just sort of
Yeah,
classical
it used
games.
to be,
So
people would kind of frown upon you like you were playing the London system if you played the Bishop B5, and now the London system's in fashion too. So it's just,
yeah, no,
it's
exactly.
funny.
Actually, London is played. I think, especially by strong GMs, it might be played more by strong GMs than anybody
Yeah,
else.
it's so strange because just like what, a couple decades ago, people, the consensus was no, top grandmasters wouldn't use the London. Yeah,
Yeah,
because there's just not enough winning
no,
chances.
for
But
sure.
it shows how fashion changes. So if your opening's not fashionable, but it is a main opening and is following the opening principles and this and that, no big deal. It's actually better for you if it's not fashionable because then your opposition doesn't have a whole bunch of games that they've maybe watched. Um,
Yeah, no, 100%. Um, yeah, and like you said, opening fashion changes, and I think what it shows also is that even in the London, there's like a lot of rich sort of middle game
mm-hmm.
options. And so strong players can still outplay other strong players, even from what, yeah, like I think when you and I were playing a lot more, maybe in the 90s, 2000s, like the London was considered a very boring
Mm-hmm.
opening. Um, and like, oh, how is either player going to win one of these games? Um, but now it's like, oh, that you find out that even the very top players make mistakes in those kinds of positions, and yeah, chess is still pretty rich.
I see in our chat somebody loved your perpetual podcast interview. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, okay. Hey, thank you.
So yeah, you're making the rounds. That's a maybe the most popular chess podcast, I think. Um,
Yeah, with Ben Johnson. Yep. I enjoyed doing that. He's a good interviewer. Um, yeah, I had not I'd listened to some of his podcasts
hmm
before, especially when it's with somebody who I know. Then I go and check it out. But I'd never been on his podcast, uh, prior to that. But that was
Yeah,
fun.
and then like you said, you appeared with Cigar in Chess Base India, and
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
huge. I don't know how many followers Chess Base India has, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
It's a ton. Yeah. I think it's funny because one of my colleagues who he actually, so we'd been working together probably for over a year, but he didn't know that I played chess, but he followed Chess Base India on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube. And so he got the notification about the interview, and then the next day he messaged me saying, "Hey, I just saw your interview on Chess Base India. I didn't realize you were a chess
Yeah.
player." Like, and same for me, vice versa, right? But I thought that was pretty amazing that just some colleague at work. It's a small
Yeah.
company. We had 100 people or so, but he picked up on it to do that.
Well, you're humble about your accomplishments in your daily life. I mean, you kind of disappeared from the chess scene for a decade, and
Yeah,
was
yeah.
focused on your professional career, and yeah, chess is during that decade, chess became extremely popular, right? The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, and I think during the lockdown era, people found the chessboard as a nice retreat from
Yeah.
hey, this is something we can do. And so chess became extremely, extremely popular. And you're not walking around wearing a shirt saying, "I am Grandmaster Vinay Bhat." It's um, and yeah, that's kind of cool that a colleague at work found out about you being a famous chess player. Let's just say it. You're a famous chess player. Um, by seeing you interviewed on Chess Base India. That's cool. What if yeah, what a
Thank
fun
you.
story. So we'll look at that second game we didn't have time for um,
Oh yeah.
in the July camp, and then we'll see if anybody in the chat room has questions for you. And yeah, if you have a question during the game too, go ahead and speak up in the chat, and I'll pass it on to Vinay as well. So in this game, it looks like it was played October 2nd, 2013, against Marcel Martinez, and you were black. Um, and Marcel Martinez was another name that you would see in print a lot in Chess Life and different chess sources. So he's also a grandmaster, right, Vinay?
I think he might have. I think he made it to international master. I feel like he probably could have. He probably had the
Mm-hmm.
strength to get to grandmaster eventually, but I feel like he probably. I think he started maybe
Mm-hmm.
coaching and then working elsewhere before that. But extremely talented player. Actually, when we first played, he beat me. He finished number one, and I finished number two. I think in the
Yes.
1999 U.S. Junior Championship. uh, and he beat me. That was a tough game, and like he had offered me a draw, which is funny because had I taken the draw, then we
Mm-hmm.
would have tied for first in the end. But I ended up losing the game. He finished a little bit ahead of me in the tournament at the end, but he was a pretty frequent opponent in the juniors because he was also one of the strongest sort of junior
Yeah.
players in the country. And this was played much later, but still, I think he was probably about rated 2430 or so. Um, and I think he was an
Yeah.
IM,
Yeah, but
or is an IM,
that's a
sorry. Yeah.
fascinating memory from 1999. So you're at this huge, hugely important Scholastic chess tournament. Important title on the line. And you're offered a
Yeah.
draw by your opponent. And if you accept the draw, you're both champions. You're both champions. And you said no.
I
Yeah.
thought I was actually better. So it's funny. I had the black pieces in that game, and I felt like I could. Yeah, I thought I was actually a little bit better when I declined the draw, and then I found out actually I wasn't better. And I think because I thought I was
Mm-hmm.
better, I kept pressing, and then I overextended, and now it was worse. And certainly he wasn't going to take a draw
Yeah.
anymore. So yeah. I made that mistake a few times where I generally am a pretty optimistic person at the chessboard, and so I tended not to like to take
Yeah, so
draws
you were
unless I had
definitely
to.
playing the board, not the and in the moment. You weren't thinking about the
Yeah,
championship trophy. You were just making your decision based on the position on the board. That's that's very
yeah.
rare
Actually,
in that kind of situation.
it's funny because that reminds me of in 2008. So the U.S. Championship has a qualifier tournament
Mm-hmm.
to get into it. And often that tournament's the US Open. The winner of the US Open qualifies automatically for the US Championship. But in 2008, they held a Swiss system tournament just before. And in the final round, I was playing another player from Miami, Julio Becerra, Grandmaster. I had the white pieces against him, and he offered me a draw. And if I accepted the draw, both of us would have qualified for the US Championship. But again, I thought it was better. I declined the draw and I ended up losing. And because I lost, I slipped to, I think, third or fourth place, which meant that I no longer qualified for the US Championship that year. Julio
Uh-huh.
obviously qualified. He won the tournament outright. But it's funny that, yeah, I did the same thing. It wasn't the first time against Marcel that I refused to draw and ended up losing. But yeah, in 2008, for a spot at the US Championship, I also, maybe foolishly in hindsight, I refused to draw
Yeah. So,
because I thought it was better.
it's important to focus, and be in the moment and focus on the chessboard. Just, at the Menlo Park Chess Club, I was talking with my students last night, because the structure of the tournament was
Hmm.
you play your opponent once as one color, and then you return and play them with the opposite color, the same opponent again. So regardless what happened in the
Yep.
first game, you got to come back and have that fresh start, and just leave everything in the past, and be in the moment at the chessboard. Um, but sometimes there's these situations, special situations, where if you all you need is a draw and your team wins a tournament, or all you need, and they actually have an allowance for coaches, in the final round of scholastic tournaments. Um, a player can come and ask the coach, the team standings, if they're the last player to finish. They're
Oh yeah.
allowed.
Okay.
There's this the
Yep.
one time they're allowed to ask the coach, if I get a draw, does our team win first place? And with you, qualifying for the U.S. Championship, my goodness, all you needed was the draw, and you qualified. And were you were you
Yep.
aware of that fact during that game? That all.
I, I I was aware of the fact. I was up upon it during in that position, and so I knew that I would qualify. But I also felt like, hey, I'm a grandmaster. I'm up upon against this guy. There's no way I'm gonna lose this game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably gonna win, and maybe at worst I'll draw the game. So I thought he was trying to escape with the draw because
Sure.
both of us would qualify then. Um, and I was like, hey, no, I've put in the work to get this advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely better. There's no doubt about it. But I thought my odds of losing the game were probably,
Mm-hmm.
slim to none. And it turned out I lost the game actually pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, yep, that was one where I should have kept the result
Yeah.
in mind
Okay.
for
So
sure.
that was going to be my next question. If you consider that a mistake, because I mean you've attained your grandmaster title by being uncompromising at the chessboard, and probably declining a lot of draws, um, and and you're looking at the position, and you said you were like thinking percentage wise that the chances of you losing was minuscule, um, and so you're making like
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
a decision based on probability a little bit, and yeah, it most of the time those probability based decisions have worked very well for you, um, obviously. um, yeah.
No, I agree. I think I tended to, even as a little kid, I tended to
Hmm.
decline draw offers. Like just because a higher rated player offered a draw didn't
Yeah.
mean I automatically took it. Uh, but I think sometimes, especially, I think it's good to, like what you were saying of playing in the moment, I think is actually really, it's very tough for chess players because you remember that, like, hey, I made a mistake here. Oh man, last time I played this guy,
Hmm.
Marcel beat me, right? Um, and so like you have that memory of things, and it's tough. I think there are certain players who do a better job of being able to stay in that moment and kind of play like as though it
Hmm.
was a fresh position. Um, but on my side, I think I sometimes struggled with that, but I sometimes struggled to balance like, okay, like uncompromising sort of chess with, hey, like, what's probably the best result for me in this game? And actually, like a year or two later after the Becerra game, I think I had a better handle on that, where um, I still didn't want to make quick draws, but I had a better idea in mind of like, hey, what's my standing in the tournament? Like, is the real goal to qualify for the US Championship? Is it to try and just win this tournament or win a prize? And keep that in mind. And there were a couple last round games where I did take draws, where maybe earlier I might have just been like, oh no, like I can do better. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a little bit of balancing act, but especially when you're learning as a kid, I think it's like really important not to like rush to take, draws, even if your opponent's higher rated,
Yeah.
because that's partly how you learn. It's like how do you win a better position against somebody who is higher rated than you? Because yeah, otherwise you'll see that higher rated players, they realize they're in trouble. They're going to offer you a
Mm-hmm.
draw because they don't want to lose either, right? So they're hoping you
Yeah,
take that
and
draw.
it's, just one final note on that, for the young people. If you're playing a higher rated player and they offer you a draw, you can, as long as you don't make a move, you can accept the draw 5 minutes later. You can pause and look at the position and
Hmm.
think about, what the goals are. And almost always the goal is, trying to win the game, especially if you're better. But as Vinay said, he's learned to consider, other goals, even before the start of the game. Um, as it pertains to finishing in a certain position in the tournament, if it means qualifying or not for another opportunity. Let's go ahead and look at this game against Marcel Martinez. So, game starts, and let me check my windows again. Yep, we got the chessboard nice and big. Awesome. So, game starts e4, e6. So, French defense. Some people consider this kind of a quiet opening. But James Eade likes to argue with those players, saying that actually black is fighting for the same square white is right off the bat. Both players are fighting for d5. Um,
Yeah.
so d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4, and then bishop d3. So, what do you want to tell us about this position so far?
So like you said, this is the French defense. With knight c3, bishop b4, we entered what's called the winnower variation. And the winnower is, to Jimmead's point, it's a little bit more of a fighting opening than, say, knight f6 is a little bit quieter
Mm-hmm.
typically, or d takes e4 is a little bit quieter and safer. Um, Bishop b4 invites a lot of complications. You already can see that bishop has abandoned the g7 pawn. So a lot of white's uh, ideas in this opening are to play queen g4 and bother that g7 pawn. Um, and with bishop d3, though, Marcel takes a very different route. It's a much quieter sort of line. It's a side line. I had played actually one game in this maybe a couple years prior, so against international master David
Mm-hmm.
Proust. So he's a local guy. Actually, I grew up playing him, and like when we were little kids too. But he had played Bishop D3 against me a couple years prior, and I had won that game. But when Marcel played Bishop D3, I thought, hey, maybe he's looked at something from that game, but I had also looked at that game myself too, and so I had a different idea in mind now of how to deal with this.
Yeah, oftentimes players, and it's even like in the club level now. They post the pairings, and people go and look at what their opponent has played in the past. And so, but back in 2013, that was more of something you saw in the higher level circles, and yeah, I'm sure Marcel saw that game against David Pruis. Um, and then DX E4, uh, and that's
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Exchanged on
And
e4. Yep.
then Bishop takes E4, and then Knight
Mm-hmm.
F6, threatening that bishop that's not really defended, um, and Bishop F3, and now you're castled. Um, And so, what do you want to tell us about this position?
So this is a little bit of a strange position, right? This bishop is on f3 instead of white typically would bring a knight to
Mm-hmm.
f3. But the whole point of the bishop on f3 is that it tries to restrict black's queenside development. So this bishop on c8 might be a little bit stuck. It may not be obvious exactly how black wants to develop the rest of his pieces. Instead of castles, when I played against David Pruis, I actually played c5, which is a pretty natural
Mm-hmm.
move, trying to fight for more of the center. Uh, and I think c5 is a totally fair move. It's probably the position's about equal almost regardless of what
Mm-hmm.
happens. I think, but after c5, I think he played a3, and he forced me basically to trade this bishop for his knight.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got us, he has double pawns. His pawn structure is a little bit ruined, but he does have the two
Mm-hmm.
bishops as well. And so the position's probably about even. But because I thought that maybe Marcel had looked at that game, and I had also come up with a new idea based on sort of that prior game. That's where I played
Mm-hmm.
castles here. The other interesting thing about this was specifically that this was played as part of the U.S. Chess League, and so I was playing for the San Francisco team, the San Francisco
Uh-huh.
Mechanics, and Marcel was playing for the Miami team. I'm forgetting their name at the time, but I think we both might have been on board two for each of our teams. I think potentially Patrick Wolf was on board one for us, or maybe for a little bit. Yeah, I think probably Patrick was playing board one in
Mm-hmm.
that match for us. Um, and so to your point earlier, this was a team event. And typically in the team events, you want to keep sort of the position a little bit more control on the position. Because to your point, maybe you only need a draw in the end to win the match. And so you want to give yourself some options. With this one, actually, I had an idea in mind that I had never played before, but I thought it would be a little bit double-edged and be somewhat safe as well. So that's what I
Okay.
was going for here.
And you talked about how the bishop on f3 kind of troubles your decision making on the bishop, especially the bishop c8. Um, what
Hmm.
is it going to do? I mean, if you're watching in chat, um, I mean, it's blocked by the pawn on e6, which is very common in the French defense. But having the b7
Hmm.
pawn pinned to your rook is not very common. So this is going to be tricky. How Vinay is going to make use of his queenside pieces in this position. Let's watch and learn. So with the bishop on f3, Marcel plays knight e2, um, and Vinay, you play e5. Wow. So what's going on here? This is your big idea with the castling, right?
Exactly. So the idea here is that I can maybe open up the diagonal for this bishop on c8, and obviously
Mm-hmm.
white can take this pawn on e5. That's also what Marcel does. But then after a trade of queens on d1, the knight on c3 is pinned, so he has to
Mm-hmm.
recapture with the king on d1. And so he's lost the right to castle at that point. So my whole pawn sacrifice, it's pretty concrete. And basically I'm saying that even with the queens off the board, it's worth a pawn for him to
Yeah.
lose the right to castle. Normally, think about like in a middle game, you'd say, "Oh, I'd sacrifice a pawn to make sure I keep my opponent's king in the center," and that's a lot more typical with queens on the board. But here, I'd realized that even with the queens off the board, Black still has some
Yeah.
good attacking chances. Um, and so Marcel was definitely surprised by this move. Uh, I think he spent a little bit of time on it, but pretend, for example, he castles. He wants to avoid giving up the right to castle. At that point, I can take on trade pawns on d4, for example. I could think about developing. Uh, I could actually trade
Hmm.
pieces on c3 as well. I have a few different options there. So I think actually if we bishop takes c3 here might be even stronger. Um, the
Oh, wait.
point being that if
Uh-huh.
then e takes d,
Hmm.
um, but if he recaptures with the pawn on b takes c3, then e4 will trap the bishop on f3 as well.
Ah.
So he's got a little bit of a problem there of how does he can't even play it too safe with
Yeah.
castles, because he's going to be the one who's losing material here. So in the end, Marcel decided to take the seemingly free pawn on e5, but I was pretty happy about that because I felt like appear pretty quickly on the board.
Yeah, I really like it. It's really cool because you think you don't want to go to into an endgame down a pawn, but
Yeah.
you're all the you've got so many pieces left after the queen's traded and white's lost their ability to castle. So this it's a fascinating thing. I mean that losing the ability to castle is usually magnified if the queens stay on the board. But here we have losing the ability
Yeah.
to castle with immediate queen exchange, and you went for it. Let's see how it works. So dx e5, and then queen takes d1. There goes the queens. King takes d1. White's lost their right to castle, and then you don't waste any time. Knight g4, threatening the nice fork on f2, and then is pretty much bishop takes g4 is his only good option here, right? Uh, yeah.
Exactly. He's either going to lose the pawn on f2 or the pawn
Mm-hmm.
on e5. And if he loses extra pawn, then he's
Castle.
given up the right to castle and he doesn't even have any extra material to show for it. So it's he wants to avoid that situation. But by trading on g4 now, he loses his really strong bishop
Mm-hmm.
on f3 and my bishop gets to come out
Yeah, and you've
unopposed.
you've
So
solved that
this
problem. It looked impossible. It
Yep,
looked
exactly.
impossible to me. It
Yeah.
just looked, what are we going to do with this bishop? And then that e5 pawn push just solved so many problems for black, and now white's the one with problems. Um, yeah.
Yeah, you can see black has both bishops out. White's king is stuck in the center. The e5 pawn is also not that easy just to hang
Mm-hmm.
on to, right? Like, uh, my, you can imagine black's next move is going to be knight c6, for example. Then he could put a rook on, bring a rook to d8 with check, so he could bring the rook on a8 there. He could bring the rook on f8 to e8 and attack the e5
Yep.
pawn some more. The two bishops crisscross as well. So like right now the bishop on g4 pins the knight on e2, but imagine if the white king moves to e1, then the knight on c3 is
Yep.
pinned. So there isn't. It's interesting how even in the end game there are sometimes
Uh-huh.
attacking chances, and here it's yeah, it's a very I feel like unique kind of end game actually, where typically, like you said, you care way more about the material count in the end game. You don't think about attacking in the end game. You're thinking about queening a pawn, or trying to queen a pawn, for example. That's like that's the theme behind a lot of end games is king and pawn endgames. How do I get
Mm-hmm.
an extra queen? It's a rook and pawn endgame. How do I make a passed pawn so I can make a queen and win his rook? But in this one, this is a different kind of endgame. It's still both of us had to play it like a middle game still.
Yeah, it's really unique, and it's really a cool line. It's really a cool line that you can try at home. I mean, this is
Yeah,
something you can try in your own games. It's just really neat. Let's see what Marcel does. He does not like this pin on his knight, and he does not like you said, if he moves his king over, then the other knight's pinned. So he plays f3, and then you move your bishop to f5. And is there obviously there's maybe a rook d8 and forcing the king, and then you win c2, right? Um,
exactly. No, that's right. And he sees the same thing, and so he tries to kick the bishop one more
mhm.
time. But yeah, you're exactly right. I just want to keep in touch with that c2 pawn. I'm basically being a little
Mhm.
pest to him at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, this is fun. And then bishop e6. So you have to take your eye off that c2 pawn. And um, you didn't play bishop g6. Why?
Bishop g6 is interesting too, actually. I was debating between the two. I think bishop g6 keeps in touch with the c2
Mm-hmm.
pawn, but I was a little bit worried in some cases that maybe my bishop would be a target for either
Yeah.
h4, h5 ideas,
Mm-hmm.
f4, f5 ideas, and my bishop is never going to get trapped on the e6 square. Uh, so I was thinking in the game, but that bishop actually potentially puts some pressure on the g4 pawn. So it's not so easy for him to play f4 anymore to support the e5 pawn because the g4 pawn will hang. So when I played bishop e6, I would say that I didn't have necessarily like 100% concrete reason for like, oh, this is the
Mm-hmm.
right move. It was a little bit more a feeling of, hey, next move, I'm probably going to develop my knight on b8. I'm going to attack that pawn on e5. I want to make sure he doesn't get to play f4 to both support that pawn and also threaten to trap my
Yeah.
bishop. So that was the main
Yeah.
motivation,
Bishop
really.
g6 invites those pawns to go forward, and it might not be sustainable. It's active, but it might not be sustainable. Bishop e6. How's your opponent gonna trouble that bishop? Um, not easy, because now, like you said, if he pushes f4, g4 is hanging. Let's see, a3. So he's bugging your other bishop now with a pawn,
Hmm.
and this time you respond differently. You just take the knight. There goes your bishop pair. Tell me about this decision.
Yeah, I didn't really want to do this, but I didn't feel like I had any good alternative, really. Um, Imagine if the bishop retreats to c5, for example, or a5
Hmm.
even. He might have b4, for example, to kick
Again,
it
those, yeah.
further. Uh, and he might have knight e4 to bother the
Uh-huh.
bishop. Really, I think if you're thinking about what your opponent's going to do here, what he wants to be able to do is get his king to safety in some way. And so a couple options for him are to almost pretend to castle queenside. So he could play, bring the bishop on c1 out, move the king to c1, and then maybe move the king to b2, for
Hmm.
example. He'll connect the rooks that way. Another option for him is to play knight e4, c3, king c2, for example. And so what I decided here in giving up the bishop pair is that I saw a way that I thought was it's a pretty concrete calculation that I can start bothering all his weak pawns on e5, f3,
Hmm.
g4. Um, it's something actually I, I I didn't have this exactly in mind when I played this game, but I used to read a lot of books about or by Capablanca
Uh-huh.
as a kid. Jose Raul Capablanca, so he was world champion for a number of years in the early 1900s, and he had written that one of the advantages of the bishop pair, one advantage is that the bishops can control a large portion of the board. So when the position's open, the bishops can attack more squares all at once than a knight can, typically. But another advantage of the bishop pair is that you can give up the bishop pair to trade it in for another advantage. And in this case, what I did was I basically traded in the advantage of a bishop pair for a bigger lead in development. And it's really predicated on these pawns on e5, f3, and g4 still being a little bit tough to defend, and white's king still being in the
Yeah,
center.
well, I mean, I'm gonna wait to make my final judgment when we see the end of the game. But if this works the way you're describing, then yeah, it definitely fits in the next Capablanca's best chess endings, or inspired, yeah, book
Yeah.
inspired by Capablanca's best chess endings, which by the way is an excellent book. And yeah, everybody should study up on Capablanca. The guy was incredible and easy to understand. So bishop takes c3. You get rid of your bishop pair, and then he improves his knight. Knight takes c3, and then
Mhm.
knight c6. Your rooks are unified, and then now you're ahead in development. Your rooks are already unified, and white has two pieces still in his back rank. He plays king
Mhm.
e2 right now instead of developing the bishop. And that's presumably to get out of the open file, right? So you don't get free development
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
rook. But when the king's on e2, it is within reach of the knight. And you play knight d4 check. Um,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
now your knight is threatening c2 and f3. Um, and so your opponent has a decision to make what pawn he wants to continue defending. Was king e2 a mistake on his part, you think?
King e2 is probably a little bit of a mistake. His idea was that he's up a
Mm-hmm.
pawn right now, and he wants to basically sacrifice a
Mm-hmm.
pawn back to catch up in development. So his hope is actually that I go pawn hunting, he can get his king to safety, and then he can bring his bishop on c1 out. If we go back a move, you're right that he could have played bishop f4. And I think bishop f4 is probably it's a little bit of a safer move. I don't think he's probably still a little bit worse
Uh-huh.
in the end here, but I think he should have played this way. So if I play f6 in this position, um, I think it's still a little bit risky for him. So I'm obviously just threaten the e5 pawn, and we can trade on f6, take back the bishop's attacked, and the bishop's pretend he takes the pawn on c7, for example. Then I take the pawn on f3, and this is where I'm still attacking that g4 pawn, and pretend he plays h3, for example. And now I can play a move potentially like knight d4 or rook f2. Um, and I can start to basically actually, I want to pin him to that first rank, because now pretending I'm threatening rook f2, and that c2 pawn is basically impossible to
Mm-hmm.
defend in a lot of ways. So he is still up a pawn in this position, but he is surprisingly tied up because, like you said, not having the rooks connected means it's really hard to coordinate your pieces. And that's one of the reasons why, like, one of the opening principles is to try and castle quickly. Is like you want to be able to use all your pieces, and here White has trouble coordinating his
Mm-hmm.
defense even. Black had other ideas even besides f6, but this I think is pretty straightforward, and it just continues sort of the initiative, even though it's an endgame. It's just very awkward for White to play this kind of endgame. I guess another idea actually, h3 maybe doesn't even guard the pawn because rook takes h3. Actually, I
Mm-hmm.
just I just realized that. So you probably actually can't even play h3.
Yeah.
Instead of knight d4, black takes on h3, rook h3, bishop g4 check. actually wins a pawn. Um, so he probably doesn't even have that way just to guard the g4
Yeah.
pawn very easily.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really fascinating variation. I'm glad I asked you the question. Eh,
No, I think he was I don't think he played King E2 very happily. But I think from his perspective, he was like, if I'm going to lose the pawn back, let me at least make him waste some time
yeah.
to get that pawn.
And okay, so let me get back to reality here. But sometimes, sometimes some of the best variations are the ones never played. So King E2 is what your opponent plays, and it looked a little strange, which is why I asked if it was a
Hmm.
mistake, because Bishop F4 looks so natural. But you showed Bishop F4 has a lot of problems too. Um, and then Knight D4 check, and then he chooses to defend F3, allowing you to take C2 if
Hmm.
you want. But you play F6. You don't take on C2. Why didn't you take on C2? Why did you play F6?
Two reasons. So one is that I guess the C2 pawn actually isn't going in
Uh huh.
anyway. He still can't defend the pawn, but with his king on F2, this idea of F6, I've had this before of playing F6, but now with the king on F2, that F3 pawn may also be pinned to the
Yeah.
king. So pretend he trades on F6, rook takes F6 attack. He plays F4. I can take the pawn on G4, for example. And this whole time, the pawn on C2, it's actually still stuck.
Yeah.
Right? Like he still can't guard that pawn. So actually, in this case, he'll be down a pawn in the end game instead of a pawn. So um, the idea of F6 is again, I'm playing it a little bit like a middle game, even though it looks like it should be an end
Yeah.
game. So uh, it's in the middle game, for example, you're happy to sacrifice material for an attack and an initiative. And yeah, I'm just in no rush to get my pawn
Yep.
back.
It's the experience factor. Vinay has been in by 2013. You've been playing chess a very, very long time, and a lot of youngsters, and maybe myself included, would have just simply played knight takes c2 because you win a pawn and you threaten a rook. So you win a pawn and you don't lose time. But
Hmm.
this position, this variation you just showed us, is nasty. The black pieces are swarming around white's king, and the pawn on c2 still sits there for free. So cool stuff.
Hmm.
All right. So f6 played, and then king g3, getting out of that f file so that the and now that king is in place to help guard g4. Um,
Yep.
fx e5, you get a center pawn. It's an isolated one, but it opens up the attack on f3, and now g4 is guarded by the king, so he can play f4. But the problem is you have a pawn controlling f4, so he plays f4,
Yep.
and now here's another big kind of fork in the road. Should you take f4 with the pawn and check, and then he would take back with his bishop, right, Vinay? Uh, yeah, and then he
Exactly.
gets
Yeah.
to
Yep.
unify his rooks. And so you
Yep.
chose knight takes c2. His rooks are
Hmm.
not unified, and his rook's under attack. So he plays rook b1, and it's interesting that had his king stayed in the d file, the rook on a your next move would have happened a lot sooner. But he played that. He
Yep.
played that interesting king e2 move, and so now you play rook a to d8, and leaving the tension on e5. You don't want to help him get his bishop developed, and he plays f5, attacking your bishop. And you look at the checks, captures, and threats, I'm sure, here, and see rook d3 check. So tell us about this position.
No, I think it's a good stopping point, and I think you framed it exactly correctly. That like I didn't want to help him connect his rooks earlier by trading on f4, and the other thing you mentioned about checks, captures, and tempo moves, things like that. At this point, one of the neat things about chess is just because you can take a piece doesn't mean you have to take a piece. Just because your opponent's threatening something doesn't mean you can't threaten something bigger, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So in this case, by giving the check, I'm trying to force White to make a decision with his king. Does he want to go, for example, if he goes to the F
Mm-hmm.
file, then he's not threatening my bishop anymore because that pawn on F5 is pinned. But if he goes to G2, for example, then maybe he has to worry about bishop d7 to c6 check, for
Ooh,
example.
interesting.
Um, and it's not like he's got there's no walk in the park
Mm-hmm.
basically for him at this point. So, and the other option is king h4, but that feels a little bit strange to put the king all the way on the edge
Yeah.
of the board. I can't imagine a lot of human players, at least, playing king h4 there. But that's where I want to see where he goes first to figure out, do I really need to move this bishop later
Mm-hmm.
or not? And his concern about this bishop showing back up on the long diagonal, so bishop d7 to c6, is why he actually chose in this position to go back
Mm-hmm.
to f2. So he kind of admits that, oh man, like I don't love my position here. The king on g3 seemed kind of safe, but now I've got to go back into the
Yep.
firing line.
And let's see. E4. So you advance the pawn. Um, and tell me about your decision here.
This was actually maybe
Mm-hmm.
the move I was most proud of in this game because obviously white
Mm-hmm.
can just take that pawn, but then black has a nice, quiet, simple move of bishop d5. And how is white going to guard that knight? So the rook, if the knight moves, the rook
Mm-hmm.
on h1 is hanging behind it. Um, the rook can't come to e1 to guard the knight. White's other rook on b1 is helpless, the bishop is helpless, and the king is
Yeah.
helpless. So strangely here, white is just toast because knight takes
Mm-hmm.
e1 after rook e1. The other option for white is to play a move like knight c5. That does temporarily hang on to the piece, but something like rook
Yeah.
f3 check, and white is still in big trouble. And so e4, what it does is it gives me a little hook into white's position here because now I have ideas of rook f3 check potentially. I could maybe consider e3 check
Mm-hmm.
and actually just bury the bishop on c1, for example. Um, and so I've got a number of still attacking ideas here, and e4 I thought was a nice little, not
Mm-hmm.
directly attacking anything, but it's setting up sort of a future attack where it looks like, oh, maybe I have to do
Yeah, it's
something
it's a
more
really
immediate.
pretty move. Yeah, definitely, it will be one of my favorites of this game. Bishop g5. So his rooks are connected, and then because he again he can't take the bishop that looks free because the pawn is pinned to his own king. Um, and then you go ahead and take that pawn. Wow, bishop takes. What does Vinay see here? Let's see. G takes, rook takes check. Now both rooks are in play, troubling that king. King e2. Um, and I mean, does he have any other options there? Um, I guess g2 was a possibility for him, but
G2 is an option, then I just take the
yeah,
bishop with
yeah. Oh,
check.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
His hope is that his hope is basically that after king e2, rook takes
Mm-hmm.
g5, he may be able to take this pawn on e4, for
Yep.
example. Uh, and so that's why he went to e2
Yeah, and
mode.
you're not interested. You're
Uh,
interested in the king, not the bishop, right now. And knight d4. And wow, beautiful game. Beautiful,
Thank
beautiful
you. Yeah,
game.
and he called it a day at this point. He resigned because after king e1, I can take his bishop on
Uh huh.
g5, and at that point, uh, four because rook e3 check, and then I win the knight for free.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and meanwhile, yeah, like what else is he gonna do? After all this trouble, he still hasn't connected his
Yeah.
rooks, right? What's funny is he's tried so hard, so many times to connect his rooks and bring all his pieces out, and his king has ended up back on e1, where it has where
Mm-hmm.
it started actually even.
And
So
I think your innovation of e5 was just really cool, sacrificing the pawn and trading queens. Immediately after the sacrifice, that was really cool. And then fast forward a bit. Um, my other, one other point that was really nice was f6 when you played 15 f6 instead of taking the pawn and threatening the rook. Really, really cool stuff. And yeah, that's the idea that that pawn on c2 is not going anywhere. That was neat. Bringing in increasing your attack when your opponent's not ready to respond because his rooks aren't unified and his king's exposed. Really neat stuff. F6, and then that little pawn move that does some. Yeah, there it is. 21 e4. Wow, what a beautiful game, Vinay. And this,
thank you,
it
thank you.
tells you a lot about how good this book is. That this did this game make the cut? Was it in there?
This game actually did not make the cut in
Yeah.
the end. And I had there are actually a bunch of other games that I thought were really nice. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to share, but ended up not including this game was partly for length reasons, but partly also that while it was uh, one of my favorite games that I played, and actually against a very common like opponent for me, I played Marcel a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
We both beat up on each other a bunch of times too, actually. So it wasn't all one-way traffic. But I tried to include games where they were both some of my best games, but also games that were at critical moments for me of either tournaments or learning opportunities of
Mm-hmm.
getting stuck, for example. And so I ended up not including this game, but it still is one of my favorites. And what's funny is that nobody has ever played Bishop D3 against me in the opening there
Mm-hmm.
ever since this game. So nobody's
Wow.
bothered with. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I basically I felt like I put the line to rest. Nobody's ever tried it against me
Yeah,
since.
that's fascinating. So it's a game that your opponents and your top opponents are acutely aware of, although it did not make the final cut for the book. Again, this book is incredible. It is book of the year, best chess instructive book of the year. But it's more than just chess instruction. It's um, it's a story. It's Vinay's story, and it's history. It's so many things, and it's blended so nicely that it's just easy to read. It doesn't feel like um, it's not going through Dvoretsky's Endgame manual. This is which is another excellent book, very instructive, but it's not fun to read. This book is fun to read, fun to play through the games, and yeah, top three. Each group, the top point earner in each group. I'm giving away 3 more copies at the end of this week, and we have a lot of young players trying really hard um, to win this book. But if they don't um, get first place in their group to get the grand prize, how else might they get themselves a copy?
There are a few options. So all the chess sites online, like USCF, US Chess Federation, their store. There's an online website called Chess for Less. They have
Mm-hmm.
it. I believe it's currently listed on Amazon as well.
Nice.
So on Amazon.com, you can go and order it. And all of those have free shipping within the US.
Wow.
So uh, those are probably the best options. And then I think I've mentioned this before on some previous camps, but if you'd like a signed copy, feel free to reach out. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever. Send me a message, and I'm happy to send one your
Yeah.
way.
And I wonder, all these games that didn't make the cut, um, could there be a second book in the works?
That's a good question. I've been wondering about that too, actually. Do I think I have another book sort of in me on that? I think one thing you mentioned is that this book has a lot of stories in it from my chess
Mm-hmm.
career. So experiences playing other players, uh, traveling around to tournaments within the US or the world, just interacting, analyzing games with people. Uh, I feel like I feel like I have a number of other games that are like good games that could be in a book, but I don't know if I have as many
You've told your
stories.
story. Yeah.
I feel like I've told most of the stories I
Mm-hmm.
want to tell, and so I've actually been talking to a couple other chess players who are starting to write their own books, and I've been looking over sort of their shoulder on some of what they've been writing. So maybe sooner than me writing another book myself, there's some former Bay Area chess people uh, like Josh
Mm-hmm.
Friedel and so on, who are I think they have some ideas in mind, and I'm hoping to help them. If they get stuck, hoping to
Neat.
help
So
them.
you're coaching. You've done this very unique and difficult task. Not a lot of chess players have been able to do this. Write their story, and keep it fun and have it be instructive. And you've accomplished that. And now you're coaching, kind of. Yeah, you're advising other guys that you used to play with, that are potentially doing the same thing. So we might see an influx of um, some interesting chess stories and instructive books from the player's own words. That's cool. And maybe you can revive that blog of yours and put up
Yeah.
some of the
Uh,
games. A good segment on your blog, or if you decide to. You don't do YouTube, do you, Vinay?
no, I haven't been doing any YouTube videos. I used to write, yeah, for my blog for about 5 or 6 years. I was writing
Your
pretty
blog was
regularly.
fantastic. Yeah,
I wrote like hundreds
yeah.
of posts. And I do know that. So when I was putting together sort of, uh, actually, so like in the book writing process, what I wrote first was actually most of the story, the
Mm-hmm.
narrative. And then I filled in things around like, oh, I thought this was an important game, so I'll make sure to include that game. I want to say that there were maybe actually at least 20 or 30 games similar to this one against Marcel that I ended up leaving out because I didn't feel like there was as much of a story around the tension in the match, for example. And so there actually another idea that I had talking with David Pruce was, maybe more of a thematic book instead of like a look back on my own chess career, maybe more of a specific
Mm-hmm.
theme could be attacking the end game, for example, with this
Yeah.
game, some things like that. So, but yeah, your comment about a book about end games inspired by Capablanca's chess end games would also be
Uh-huh.
interesting because that was one of my favorite books growing up, and I think I read it. I think I read it front to back at least five
Mm-hmm.
times as a kid. Um, And so that would actually be an interesting another idea for like what might be a good
Well,
thematic book
you're a very
to have.
gifted
Yeah.
writer. I know you're very very busy, and that tournament that you cleaned house on in Berkeley. It's nice to see you, you know, showing up at the chessboard too. But there's the time management aspect. You've got so many things pulling at you, tugging at you in different directions. But I'm so glad that you found the time to put this together. It's truly a pleasure to read, and it's awesome because sometimes you do something really neat, you do something really great, and it's not recognized. Um, but it's really cool that you put the time, you put out this really really fantastic book, and then you're rewarded for it. You're recognized. So awesome stuff! Congratulations on winning Best Instructive Chess Book. A lot of books came out this last year, and Vinay's book won first prize, Best Instructive Chess Book. Congratulations, Vinay! And yeah,
Oh, thank
we'll
you.
be talking in the future. And we had a packed house for this game you presented, and wonderful, wonderful job. You have a way of sharing your ideas. It just makes chess easy to understand. So keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch, Vinay. Uh huh.
Thank you. And thanks everyone
So
for
long.
tuning in. See you.
Um, and everybody in the chess camp, it is time for you guys to get to your next assignment. Um, we went a little over, 7 minutes over. So if you are doing your next assignment and noon approaches Pacific time, you can pause your assignment, go play in the chess tournament, then come back and finish your work. Um, but wow, that was a really that hour flew right by, and I'm having a great chess camp. I know you guys are too. Keep up the good work. Three of you will be getting autographed copies, not just copies, but hand autographed copies of this wonderful, wonderful book. All right. So long, everybody. Have a great rest of your camp. Remember, find your assignments on dailychessmusings.com. Go to dailychessmusings.com. Find your next assignment.